some sort of agreement of or like mutual understanding of what the conditions were in, I guess, primarily Gaza, but the West Bank as well prior. So if I can list out a few points, if that's okay, and just tell me if these are accurate or not. Prior to the 7th of October, Gaza was under a full blockade, right? The maritime borders, the airspace, the land borders, and so on, for like 16 years or something, right? From 2007.
Well, full blockade would imply that Israel wasn't letting anything in.
Oh, it's total control, should I say?
Yeah, it had full control, and it made life in Gaza quite hard by not allowing things in. Very often with military purpose, but often they would say that things had dual purpose, which meant
Right.
that civilian elements weren't being allowed
Like chocolate
in.
wedding dresses.
Exactly. Things
Yeah.
that seem quite ridiculous, but they did let in enough to make life in Gaza possible. The idea was to to have stability in Gaza. That was the Israeli policy until then, because Netanyahu viewed Hamas as an asset. So the idea was to let Hamas and Gaza have enough to eke out an existence without any luxuries or enjoyment of life. I think that's sort of a fair way of putting it.
The Israelis controlled any movement of people, civilians moving in and out of Gaza, right? Is that correct? Yeah. Even
Yeah.
the Egyptian border as well. The Israelis held a veto. Is that right?
Mm,
Besides
mm,
smuggling and that kind of thing.
yeah. Depends when. Long story short, Israel didn't have too much influence on the Egyptian border until recently when it took over the Rafah crossing during this conflict, because one side in 2005 Israel left the Philadelphia corridor. Philadelphia corridor is the border between Egypt and Gaza, despite the fact that a lot of Israelis thought it was a bad idea. And one side of the border was controlled by Hamas, and one side of the border was controlled by Egypt. Egypt listened to Israel about a lot of things. Israel had a say in what Egypt did, not in what Hamas did. But ultimately, Egypt had the last word. But yeah, Egypt and Israel shared interests. It's important not to let Egypt off the hook here.
Yeah.
Egypt and Israel shared a lot of interests. They both viewed Hamas ultimately as an enemy. To Egypt, Hamas is an outcropping of the Muslim Brotherhood,
Which they
which
had
they view,
overthrown and did a coup,
yeah,
and
which
Sisi was in power.
overthrew
Yeah.
the Egyptian military rule. There was a period where Mohammed Morsi ran. People forget that Mohammed Morsi ran Egypt for an entire year. The Muslim Brotherhood ran Egypt for an entire year. So to Egypt, Hamas is almost an existential threat. And that's one of the reasons they've cooperated with Israel more than they've hindered Israel in what it's done in Gaza. Every now and then, Israel goes too far. Egypt is very concerned that Israel will drive refugees into Egypt. So that's something where their interests don't converge. But their interests do converge in terms of seeing Hamas as an enemy and generally wanting stability in Gaza so that there isn't like a refugee problem or so on and so forth. I'm talking about before the war. Now Israel doesn't want stability at all, but before that, they had a meeting of interest with stability. And even now, with stability no longer being a shared interest, they still share an interest when it comes to Hamas. So when you see tensions between Israel and Egypt, they're very often choreographed. They're very often meant to to show people in Egypt, oh, we're against Israel, we're not part of this genocide, when really Egypt has a major part in it. And so, whatever blockade was Gaza was experiencing before this conflict, Egypt had major stakes in it. And whatever suffering Gaza is suffering right now in the genocide, Egypt has major stakes in it. None of this is not to say that Israel is not the major perpetrator, but Egypt has a role in all of them.
Yeah. And now Egypt is a dictatorship, with Sisi and sort of the military backing him. So we're not necessarily talking about the people here, the population. The sentiments are very different, aren't they?
I mean, yeah, just like when we talk about Hamas, we're not talking about all the people of Gaza. Even when we're talking about Israel, we're not talking about all the people of Israel. Yeah. Government people, not the same thing. It's a good point you raised though, because in the case of Egypt, the military dictatorship is going very much against public opinion.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, a lot of people in Egypt don't like Hamas. Don't get me wrong, but Israel is hated in Egypt, wildly hated, well before this genocide. Egypt was wildly hated, and that's why Egypt kind of has to show an image that's very different from what they're actually doing in reality.
One of the frustrating sort of comments that I've heard frequently, especially earlier on, was that Hamas started this war and there was a ceasefire pre-October 7th. This is the reason why I wanted to establish a kind of agreed sort of categorization of, the situation in Gaza. I read, and I'll drop the link on screen as well, that 2022 and 2023 pre-October 7th were already being described by a number of humanitarian organizations as some of the deadliest years for Palestinians. Yeah. And one report, again, I'll drop it on screen. Israel killed approximately 250 Palestinians in the West Bank. This is approximately 40 of them were children. So this idea of a ceasefire being broken, and I'll add on to that. I'm being, I'm saying a lot here, maybe, but hopefully people can follow. The other comment I frequently heard, or example, defenders of Israel, be America and so on, addressed to an American audience. If Mexico was to suddenly start firing thousands of rockets into America, an armed men came in from Mexico into America, America would do what Israel has done, if not worse. This is short, it's not at all if an accurate comparison, is it? Or do you disagree?
Well, let's start with the first one, because that's easier. Yeah, there was never really a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. As you rightfully point out, there was an incredibly sharp rise in violence before the war, or before October 7th, and the reason being why there usually is a rise in violence between Israel and Palestinians, because Palestinians feel ignored in the peace process, such as it was. You had the Abraham Accords. Palestinians were left out of the Abraham Accords intentionally, bypassed, ignored, and there was a rise of violence, I believe, at least partially in protest to that. So we'd already had a campaign start. I called it the Third Intifada several months before October 7th. I wasn't surprised at all that Hamas tried to do something. I was always surprised at the level of success that they had. So there was no ceasefire. There was no anything. Also, ceasefires between Israel and Hamas, no one takes them that seriously. Even if there is one, they're temporary. And I mean, both sides don't take them very seriously. Both sides consider ceasefires a moment to gather force until the right moment to strike. Let's not pretend there's any saints in this confrontation. As for the missiles, yeah, Israel has a point here, I think. Since Hamas came into power in 2007 in Gaza, they launched hundreds, thousands of missiles at southern Israel, especially at Sderot and some of the kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope, making life there unlivable. And I visited those areas during that time, and there wasn't mass slaughter of Israelis or anything, but they just made life unlivable. There was a feeling that Israel wasn't exercising its sovereignty in the area, and the residents demanded consistently that Israel do more than it did. And Israel didn't. Israel did very little. One of the reasons it did very little is that cynical thing I was telling you about when they wanted to use Hamas. But also they were concerned about international ramifications and so on and so forth. They made a calculation. It's worth it for Israeli civilians to suffer in order to have our strategic wider picture realized. Israel has a duty as a sovereign nation to protect its constituents. I mean, that's how sovereign states work. Hamas provoked Israel endlessly. I think it's important to say, as much as criticism as I have, maybe this is the remaining Zionist in me, but as much criticism as I have of Israel, I have a lot of criticism of Hamas. Hamas had the opportunity to do something good in Gaza and didn't. Instead, they spent a lot of time, a lot of effort provoking Israel, attacking Israel, committing terror attacks against Israel, and ultimately that led to the destruction of the Gaza Strip. And I think, just like it's Israel's responsibility to protect the Israeli people, It was Hamas's responsibility to protect the people of Gaza, and Hamas did not protect the people of Gaza. Let's forget about whether they're trying to kill Israelis or not. That's, I think that's morally abhorrent too. But they've done a disservice to the Palestinian people. Look at the people of Gaza now, and I think Israel has genocidal tendencies to begin with. But I think Hamas really gave them a good excuse to unleash those tendencies, you know? So I wouldn't let Hamas off the hook. I wouldn't say that Hamas shooting rockets at Israel was meaningless. That set the
No, no, I
stage for
definitely
what we're
not. I'm
seeing.
saying I'm not definitely not saying meaningless at all. I'm just saying the comparison that is made with, So you mentioned with Mexico. I was going to say. So you mentioned a sovereign state. So this same Israel that has a duty towards its citizens in this sovereign state, does it accept these sovereign, 67 borders then? The
No, no, of course
kibbutzim.
not.
So
No.
who does it have a duty to protect? Pre October 7th or on October 7th, it didn't accept Gaza as an independent entity. It was under blockade, as you say. And at the same time, you're saying it had the duty to protect and it wasn't fulfilling, the protection of its civilians surrounding the Gaza envelope. But at the same time, it considers Gaza effectively, the river to the sea, the Israeli government, as far as I'm aware, considers the whole land to be Israel. I mean, they don't formally, they haven't formally annexed, right? I'm a bit all over the place here, but hopefully what I'm saying is
I
clear.
understand what you're saying.
It's like you
And,
can't have your cake and eat it. That's how I
well,
feel.
Israel want. I absolutely agree with everything you said. Israel wants to have its cake and eat it too. That's just what Israel wants to do. Now, when I said Israel has a duty to protect its civilians, I'm talking about a very old-fashioned, Hobbesian perspective of what it means to be a state, like the Thomas Hobbes, the Leviathan. You protect your citizens, and you protect your interests, and international law and the rights of other countries don't matter. What matters is the protection of your own civilians. That's in practice how most states operate in the international system. That's just a fact. The United States does it with a lot of excuses, and Russia does it with far fewer excuses. But that's generally how
Are your
states behave.
civilians those that preside within your borders?
Sorry again.
Are are your are your civilians, as you say, it has a state must protect its civilians, right? Are your civilians the individuals who live within your borders?
So I think we have a little bit of a misunderstanding here. I'm
Okay.
not saying this because this is a good thing. I think that the antiquated idea of a nation state, especially one based on ethnicity, is immoral. It's immoral. But that's what Israel is. That's what Israel is. And Israel's duty, as far as it sees it, it won't necessarily admit it openly, is to protect its Jewish citizens, not anyone else. It certainly doesn't. It doesn't consider the people of Gaza to be its citizens. You're right. It should. It doesn't consider the people of the West Bank, the Palestinians of the West Bank. Of course, it considers the Jews there to be its citizens, and it should. And it considers the Arabs inside Israel to be citizens, but kind of second-class citizens. It defends them to some extent. That's how Israel operates. It's an ethno-state. Only Jews matter. Only Jews deserve to be protected in the Israeli concept, and to them, they don't see the Gazans as people that they need to defend. In fact, we increasingly see openly, but it was always beneath the surface. They see the people of Gaza as a problem to solve, hopefully by getting rid of them. So no, though those people aren't viewed as part of Israel. Maybe the land is, but the people aren't. That is the very racist basis of the state of Israel. Zionism has always included an urge to have as much of the land with as few Arabs as possible. We're seeing that today in its most naked form, in the terms of they're just not denying it. But 20, 30 years ago, they felt the same way, but they were denying it. That's the difference. So you're hitting on a very important point here, which is those people, from the perspective of Israel, are not only are they not worth protecting, they're a problem that needs to be solved. in various means, including very, very unpleasant means. Right now, genocide.
Yeah, I don't want to miss this point then, because I wasn't expecting that comment, and it's an interesting one regarding, a state, in this case Israel has a responsibility to protect its citizens, and you had visited the Gaza envelope post 2007, post Hamas winning the elections, and and taking over Gaza and so on. I don't see how you can apply that sort of general state and protecting its civilians, that framework, to a state that, as you say, sort of excludes certain races and doesn't consider the Gazans as part of Israel, but the land it does. Do you know what I mean? It kind of feels
I
like
know what
you're
you
applying a
mean, but
general
I
principle to a state that is kind of doing its own kind of thing.
I think that you are looking at this from an idealistic perspective. Let's go back to history a little bit. What's the state? The state is some kind of convention that we've invented. It existed initially in order to protect farmers from raiders. That's what the state initially was, and to some extent still is. You had um, your Vikings, your Mongols, your people who raid and try to take over farms, and then you had a king who would say, "Give me your taxes, and in return, I'll protect you from these foreign invaders." The protection of your people against foreign, invaders, and very much on an ethnic basis, very often, is where the state originally came from. Its main role is to provide services, mostly protection, in exchange for taxation. That's what a state is. And usually that was done on some kind of ethnic level. So there's really nothing exceptional about what Israel's doing. It's just very primitive, is the way I would put it. It's the way clans and kingdoms operated for thousands of years throughout the world. You know, that's the enemy. They're scary. You give me your money, I'll protect you, and it's us against them. And the invention of international law is relatively recent. Hugo Grotius, yeah, the beginning of the Enlightenment, and the codification into treaties in the late 19th century and the 20th century. That's a blip on the history of our political institutions. And Israel is operating like a very primitive um, ethnic clan, right? And there's nothing that unique about it. There's a lot of countries in the world that do operate that way in practice. Israel's very naked about it, and Israel gets a lot of attention about it. You're thinking of this in is this morally justifiable?
I'm not necessarily talking about morals. It just doesn't add up. It sounds like we have this ideal way of how states work, and then we're mapping this onto a state, and it has a responsibility to its citizens, but actually it doesn't define its borders. It picks and chooses its citizens, and it doesn't make any sense to me. Applying these kind of principles, unless, I mean, the only thing that would make sense in that instance is, in looking at Israel in this framework, is you have a captive population, and therefore you have a responsibility to them as well. Otherwise, pardon yourself from them, declare that it's a border and you have nothing to do with them, and they're not. Do you see what I'm saying? But maybe I'm losing myself a bit, and we can move on.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you.
It's not
There's
coherent to me, but it might just be me. I don't know.
It's coherent in a horrible way. It's there to serve the interests of Jews, and it's there to exclude Arabs. There is a coherent logic to it. It's just a horrible logic. Uh,
But then
yeah,
saying you have a duty to protect the citizens in your state, in your borders, doesn't, that
it,
these
it,
two
it,
things
it,
cannot.
it does. Yeah, I'm not sure we're talking on the same level. So
Okay.
a state is based on a social contract, right? You know that concept, Rousseau and all that. Yeah, so you have a social
Yeah,
contract.
briefly, yeah.
Yeah, you serve the state, and the state provides you with services. Now in Israel, who goes to the army? Jews go to the army. Arabs go to the army in small numbers, but it's a Jewish military, and in return, the Jews expect to be protected. It's and the Jews are allowed to migrate, and Arabs are not. It's the duty is to protect Jews. You see how there's hostages in Gaza, and everyone talks about the hostages. No one talks about the Palestinians in Israel, or very few people talk about the Palestinians. Talk about the hostages. You have a duty to bring back the hostages. Why is that? Because the hostages are soldiers in the army. They signed a social contract with the Zionist government. Um, we'll serve you. You protect us. Right? That's the social contract. That's the basis of Israel. It's a state by Jews for Jews. No one else matters. Nothing else matters. Anything else was a very thin pretense, and even that pretense is gone. And it's of course it's hypocritical. Of course it's self-serving. That's the point. It's just there to serve Jews. So they have a duty to protect Jews because Jews pay them taxes and Jews serve in their military. That's the social contract. And a lot of Israelis are very upset that ultra orthodox men don't serve in the military because that defies the social contract between Jews and the military. They're very upset that the hostages haven't been returned because that defies the social contract. They don't care about Palestinians because that's not part of the social contract. Does that make sense? It's a bargain.
Yeah, I understand. I
Yeah,
understand. Yeah, yeah.
you're
Okay.
right that on on it's
E-
hypocritical, but
Everything you've
states are
just said, they would
hypocritical.
never publicly state. They would never say that to the wider world, right?
I'm
Everything you
not
just
so
said in the last 60
sure that
seconds.
Israel is very far away from actually just saying everything I
Yeah,
just said
they're
openly.
certainly closer, but I don't think they ever have. And I mean, I would be afraid as a Muslim in the UK to say something like that publicly. I don't know. I'll be
Well,
called an anti-Semite and whatnot, and
yeah, I mean,
I can't imagine
unfortunately,
they would themselves, say something
no,
like that.
the Israeli government would not put things the way that I just put them. They would never put it that way. But if you analyze their what they actually do and what they do say closely, that is what they're saying. They're just saying it without saying it. There's some very small pretenses holding Israel back from saying what I just said. They used to be very big pretenses. There used to be all these lies. There's very few lies now, actually. In some ways, Israel's never been more honest. It goes around saying Gaza needs to be depopulated. It's ours. It's a real estate bonanza. The Palestinian people shouldn't exist. There'll never be a Palestinian state. They go around saying things that they wouldn't have said 20 years ago. They're much closer to telling the truth, and the truth is awful. But there's still a thin veneer because they still have Arab citizens. They still have Druze citizens who serve in the army, and they like the fact that they serve in the army, so they pretend that they're more accepted than others. That's a big lie too. And they also want to get arms and trade with the rest of the world, so they have to sort of act like they're part of the international community. But the truth is, the logic of Israel has always been it's an ethno state, and the little decorations that tried to hide that in the past are becoming increasingly irrelevant because we live in very cynical times where there's very few morals. Israel is finding it less necessary to hide what it actually is. But you're right. If you said what I said, people would say, "Oh, Omar, you're an anti-Semite." Uh, but a lot of that is because that's one of the ways that Israel manages to stifle rightful criticism of the country. I agree with you.